My name is Jaden. I'm part of the Vancouver Startup Week team. And before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are grateful to be virtually gathered on Indigenous land, regardless where you are from, joining us from. I'm grateful to be on the traditional and ancestral unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. I'm privileged to live, work, and play on these lands. And I'd like to thank you for joining us at VSW 2021 and welcome you to Mastering Distributed Teamwork 2021 and Beyond, hosted by Kobalt. If you have any questions for our speakers, please post them in the Q&A tab. You will also find a poll created by the hosts next to the Q&A tab. So please take a moment to submit your responses as we start the session. And I'll now pass the mic over to Michael and Liam, and they can begin the session.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, and welcome everyone to the session here. Awesome. Okay, getting started. Yeah, so Mastering Distributed Teamwork 2021 and Beyond. Kind of how we're going to start running these sessions. It's going to be a lot of Q&A. It's going to be a lot of audience interaction. We're going to be talking about kind of 4 main sections here, really being distributed teams and just general kind of questions around that, team culture, finding flow, and then lastly, we'll kind of just jump into helpful softwares and any other questions that we have along the way. As we're going through this talk, please feel free just to jump in the chat, post any questions you want. We'll try and kind of answer them, and I'll try to monitor the chat as we go here. We'll also only be using slides for a few here, and then we'll just be kind of jumping into just playing back and forth with some general conversation. Just to get started, I will let Michael quickly introduce himself.
Great. So I'm Mike Largas. I'm one of your co-hosts today. And in addition to all my time in security and operations and sales, I've actually been leading distributed teams for about 15 years, including a team at Sophos, which was my first kind of time leading a distributed team, which eventually grew into a group of 120 people distributed across 17 countries around the world. And all the challenges, both time zone, language, async, that kind of represented. When I worked at TELUS, again, TELUS had moved to a largely remote work environment. Their primary business these days seems to be real estate rather than internet connections, and led distributed teams in that environment. And of course, Kobalt, both through the founding and as we've grown, has been growing in the pandemic. In fact, Liam and I work together. We have been for a few months, and we've never actually met face to face, even though in our case we happen to live in the same town. And so distributed teamwork is certainly a big part of my experience, and looking forward to talking to everybody today about it.
Awesome. Yeah, and just a quick little about me. I'm the growth marketing manager at Kobalt. I've been with Kobalt for just over 2 months now, completely remotely onboarded. Haven't actually met anyone at the company yet, even though Michael and I have spent countless hours kind of bickering and driving off each other here. So hopefully we'll be able to have some in-person meetups soon, pending all the shots and vaccines with COVID, but we'll see how everything goes. Yeah, let's just jump right into it. So first off, we'll be kind of talking about distributed teams and just general questions. I'm going to stop sharing slides just so you guys can see our faces instead of having to look at slides the entire time here. Kicking things off, Michael, just kind of general pros and cons to distributed teamwork and working remotely. Kind of what's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, so, I think of this both as a manager and leader and also as an individual. And so as an individual, there are a lot of pros to working, especially from home, although working from home in the pandemic is definitely different than working from home in normal times. And so the absence of a commute, the ability to just kind of spend time in your home environment, all that kind of stuff, those things are quite nice. Of course, you miss the social camaraderie of being in an office environment. That's definitely one of the cons. And so, that's just me at a personal level. At a kind of managerial level, there's a bunch of challenges around the inability to kind of walk around the corner, talk to your team, have that kind of unplanned encounter in those sorts of scenarios. So you actually have to think about how to enable that sort of interaction and those sort of water cooler moments in a way that don't exist in the absence of a physical environment. And so in balance, I'm very, very pro distributed teams, but it's definitely not for everybody. I think one of the other big cons, especially in a pandemic environment, so a lot of people's home environments are not entirely conducive to working, and that could be because they have kids underfoot like myself. It could be because They just don't have a great office setup, those sorts of things. And so that's something that definitely needs to be considered as well. What about from your perspective, Liam? I mean, you've worked in both environments, I imagine.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of have a weird take on it where I think my ideal situation would be working kind of 3, 4 days in office and then kind of 1 or 2 days at home. I think for me, the days that I have lots of meetings, I actually like to be in office for, so I can be very productive kind of on the ins and outs and the 30 minutes in between kind of thing. Whereas the days where I don't have meetings, I'd like to kind of just put my headphones in, power through everything. So I found it helpful in that regard. But at the same time, there's always different things to kind of really consider. Obviously, working from home, depending on what your kind of home office or home work environment looks like, it can definitely be a little bit challenging there. I think burnout is definitely one thing to consider, being very top of mind and a lot more easily to come by working from home instead of working in office. You are very much isolated, and for the individuals who aren't at home with partners or with pets or anything like else like that, it can be very tricky, both kind of mentally on the kind of draining side of things, as well as kind of work, just making sure that you're not getting burnt out, making sure that your mind and effort are still in it. I definitely can kind of see that there's been some instances where I have worked much more productively in office, and then there's been times where I can definitely go a bit more at home. But that's kind of my take behind it. I know, kind of as you mentioned, having the physical office does have its kind of pros and cons there. In terms of any kind of like negative symptoms you see from working from home, making sure that people aren't burning out, making sure that people aren't kind of isolated and everything. How do you look to combat that as a CEO?
Yeah, so one of the things I would like to say is, in my experience, the burnout factor is higher right now than it's ever been in the past for distributed work, if that makes any sense. So it's not just the fact that the teams are distributed, but the fact that the teams are distributed and we're all trying our best to survive in the middle of a pandemic. That's really, I think, exacerbating the burnout. And I say that from the perspective of somebody who led and worked and managed remote and distributed teams prior to a pandemic and then is now doing it in a pandemic. And so I think it's important to, as you said, find those ways to carve out time so you're not dealing with constant interruptions. One of the ways that we tend to kind of combat distributed teamwork is by, leaning heavily on technologies like Slack and all this kind of stuff that tend to barrage us with notifications and interruptions. Actually encouraging team members to take mental health breaks. It's very easy when you're working at home to just kind of get heads down and power through a day. Whereas in an office environment, very often you'd be naturally able to just take breaks and somebody would walk over and say, hey, do you want to step out for a coffee or get out and get some air and stuff like that? That's less likely to happen in an office environment. So actually, like, taking a time to run meetings short and saying, hey, get out and enjoy the sunshine for 20 minutes and these sorts of things, I think can go a long ways. But the mental health challenges of the pandemic and everything else are not to be taken lightly. And it's something that I'm constantly thinking about as it relates to the team and how do we support them. And I think the other challenge of that is right now people are generally not taking as much time off as they should be because you can't go anywhere. And so you're just less likely to want to take those vacation days. And we actually all need time to rest, recuperate, and regenerate. And so even if we can't take time away, finding a way to take time off and truly unplug is really important as well.
For sure. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think I find myself doing a little pace around my apartment at least kind of 10 to 15 times a day just to clear my head. So no, I think it's great that kind of yourself and the rest of the management team at Kobalt is being really great in acknowledging that and making sure that people aren't going to be burnt out, and making sure that you're actually touching just as much on the cultural side and people's mental health as much as actually making sure work ethic and everything is kind of going there.
And startup environments are pretty high burnout environments anyway, right? And so startup, pandemic, distributed work, all those things combine. And so it's just trying to find your way through that as a team.
For sure. And I mean, speaking to that kind of cultural standpoint too, how do you make sure that you're addressing the team culture behind it, making sure everyone's happy, making sure people are avoiding burnout, but also staying productive at work and making sure that all the targets are getting hit at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, generally my management and leadership style has not been micromanagement. And so, there's not really a whole lot of advantage to being in person with somebody versus, being remote in terms of how I might choose to manage someone. I think, I always refer to like Daniel Pink and Drive and mastery, autonomy, and purpose. If you give people who are, professionals and adults, good goals, good support, good guidance, then you're really measuring on outcomes rather than, trying to micromanage their activity, because there's just not enough hours in a day to do that. And I don't think that substantially changes from remote versus in person. And so, as long as there's some clear understanding about outcomes and objectives, then, that kind of problem is less of an issue with distributed teamwork. The culture thing, I think, is way more interesting. And I'd love to get your take on it, because you're only 2 months in. I was chatting with another one, a lady on your team earlier this week. And I'm like, so you're an old timer and you've been with us since July, right? And so you're like employee number 4 on seniority out of a group of 20 kind of thing. And, the culture thing is definitely something that we've entirely grown up in the middle of a pandemic. And so we do some little things, like we make sure that everybody gets a care package as they're joining the company. So they get a little bit of, Kobalt swag and kind of a welcome to the company, so they feel like they're part of the team. We do regular water cooler events, which are entirely like unscripted, just, hey, hang out and chat and get to know each other in a way that, doesn't necessarily happen in a kind of formal meeting environment. But also in your meetings go, that banter that usually happens in that 5 minutes as people are gathering around the room before the meeting starts. Like, it's okay to let that kind of flow into the start of a meeting time, so people do get a chance to relax and get to know each other a little bit and those sorts of things. We've recently engaged with an outside organization to run some events for us on Zoom and stuff like that. And that's been a lot of fun. I mean, I'm a little bit of an introvert myself. And so I struggle a lot with the kind of constant out there trying to get a group of 20 people all excited and jazzed at the same time. So having somebody else come in and facilitate really fun activities and events, A, takes that burden off of me, but B, makes it so that the team is having some fun and interacting in a way that's not all work all the time. So what, you've been with us for a couple of months. What are some of the things that you liked about what you've seen so far? And what are some of the things that, you saw at some of your previous employers that you thought worked really well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm definitely just going to kind of touch on everything that you were saying there. I think the outside people, we had partnered with a company called Jabu that was coming in and help running a lot of these events for us. We've seen that a lot of the in-Zoom events have kind of transferred over to Slack, which I think are great. So we're starting out the day with completely non-work related questions. I mean, do you like pineapple on your pizza? Do you not? Simple questions like those, which, I mean, arguably have been a little bit polarizing for Kobalt, sure, but they've been a great way to kind of kick off the day. With the Slack stuff, we started creating a whole bunch of social channels as well. It's stuff that we've done in previous companies and have kind of transferred over to Kobalt. So we have like social photography and music and movies and all that stuff. I'm a big gamer. I'm a big music guy myself. So we'll kind of start the day posting our like favorite song of the day, whatever we're listening while we're working. Good little conversation point. Nice way just to bring the team away for 5 minutes from their work, give them a little bit of a refresh headspace just to talk about something that's not necessarily super work heavy, and then let them get back to it after that. And then on the management side of things, there's a great book called Radical Candor, which I've kind of adopted into my own management style. I would highly recommend it to kind of anyone who wants to touch up on any different management styles. But really, it's just this candid style of interacting with your team. I really don't see myself as, oh, hey, here's this manager and here's like any direct reports or whatever. I really try and get everything on the same level playing field. With that being said, obviously we need to be very distinct with how we set targets and how we set goals and make sure we're achieving those. But at the same time, you want to have that rapport with your team. You want to make sure that people can come to you with both work and non-work questions or concerns, anything that they really need to talk about. So with that, I try and set flexible hours. It's really just, hey, try and be available during core work hours. But other than that, if you want to go on and work 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. or 3 p.m., whatever else it is, go for it. If you're getting your work done, you get your work done. If you want to work 12 hours one day and you want to work 4 hours the next day, again, as long as everything's getting done, that's all that really matters to me. So again, as long as we're holding ourselves to really tight and set goals and we're achieving those, that's what matters internally to me. And then obviously with that, everyone's going to have different work styles. Everyone's going to have different personalities. With marketing teams, especially, generally, we're kind of younger crews and everything. So it's a lot more kind of rambunctious and social chatter and whatnot in the team. But We have some people on the team who are huge introverts. We have some people on the team who are huge extroverts. And really it's trying to establish what that connection is and how we can kind of work individually with each one of those employees. And how I have calls with one isn't necessarily how I would start calls with the other. Some people like to jump directly into work. Some people like to have that 5-minute debrief at the start of every kind of Zoom call just to see how their day is going and have that quick little chit chat, and that is their break. One thing I've seen work really well is with a lot of HR platforms, whether it be like Bamboo HR or 7Geese, kind of so on and so forth. You can do like little personal notebooks or bios for yourself. And that's something that I've loved to run with my team. So just kind of saying, hey, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite food? How do you like to be recognized? Do you want a big shout out in a Slack channel? Do you want a quick little private message saying, hey, great work on this, really appreciate what you've done? And I thought XYZ was really well put together. Things like those kind of help you interact individually with your team. And then as you start doing that, everything starts to mesh really well together. And I think everyone works a lot more cohesively. And then that being said as well, going back to the Slack, the recognition channel is another great low-hanging fruit that you can do. Literally just set up a Google Forms, what we've done, and we've used Zapier to really just make that connection. So if you ever want to shout anyone else, you just quickly fill out the form, sends it directly to the recognition channel for the entire company to see, and then everyone kind of just gets to give you a little pat on the back, and it's a nice little way to incorporate everyone.
There's something you said that I want to riff off of for a second, which is the comment about kind of different hours and work styles, and your notes on the staff members and how everybody has their own different preferences and stuff like that. One of the great things I think about distributed teamwork is, if you think about an office environment, it is fairly regimented by nature, right? Like it's, traditionally people are there kind of 9 to 5-ish. There's certain expectations around dress and culture, and not cooking fish in microwave and all these sorts of different things. Whereas in a homework environment, there's a lot more flexibility for people to work in a way that best suits their productivity, right? And so if you're a morning person, you can be up early. If you're a night person, you can be up late, and you can kind of find ways to work around the fact that you're distributed in async, right? And so I think that's one of the great outcomes of a distributed team, is actually it enables us to support the diversity of people in a way more open and kind of welcoming way than a traditional office environment does. So sorry, I interrupted you. Let me go back, but yeah.
Oh, no, I was actually just going to throw it back to you and just say, in terms of like establishing norms with culture and with teamwork, both from like an upper management level as well as for the entire company, is there anything else that you've kind of seen work really well?
I mean, I can tell you what my strategies are in terms of what I've seen work really well. I think, really kind of going back and echoing to the core values of the business, right? So, the reason norms exist is because they're there to reinforce those values, right? And so whether that's, dress code or hours or any of those sorts of things, they need to tie back to your mission and your why. And so I find that if you focus energy on helping everybody see the mission, understand the values that get you to the mission, and row in the same direction, then the norms kind of fall out pretty naturally from that. I'm also a pretty casual guy, right? So one of the things I love about, what we do at Kobalt is we work with all these startups and tech companies and stuff like that. And so, if I show up to work as a CEO wearing a graphic tee, well, that's okay, because so are my customers, and we're not doing suit and ties like TELUS where I used to work and stuff like that. And so, establishing norms that work well for your customer base and everything else, I think is also really reflective. Yeah, I'd love to hear your take on, what you've seen work well in other places. And if any of the audience wants to chime in as well, I'd love to hear from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely going to reiterate that. So if at any point you guys want to ask any questions, please feel free to just leave them in the chat. I'm keeping an eye on it, so I will be able to jump on any of those as we go here. But no, I definitely agree with you in terms of just not setting dress codes, not really necessarily setting set standards. So it's almost like anti-norms that create the norms, which I think is a great little way of doing it. As far as you said, like setting goals and doing all that stuff, and really making the individual, hey, we're going to focus on like innovation, we're going to try and be agile, we're going to try and be all this stuff. Like how do you set those standards, and how do you set those kind of norms around that?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So one of them is, I think as a leader, you have to live those norms and those values, right? And so, if, for example, in our organization, things like velocity and pragmatism are core values, right? And so representing that in how I work, how I operate, and making decisions through those lenses makes it easier for the rest of my team to see that and understand how to operate it. But then, when I work with the other leaders in my business or the team members, and a lot of what you do as a CEO or as a founder is you make decisions all day long, and coming back and bringing those decisions back to the lens of the norms and the values again, right? So we have this A or B option, right? And based on our values and the decisions around our values, it should be obvious what the right choice is, right? And if it isn't, then you've got another problem. And so I find that, as a leader, A, living those norms and values yourself, and B, when you're helping others making decisions, helping them see and make those decisions through that lens means that, the kind of classic leadership philosophy is, great leadership is what your team does when you're not in the room, right? And so if you're helping them kind of formulate a strategy to use your values to make their decisions, then when you're not in the room, they're going to continue that strategy, if that makes sense, right? And so again, I tend to think of the norms as cultural imperatives and values rather than anything else. But yeah, how about yourself? What do you think in terms of what are the ways that you would like to see those things reinforced in an organization, especially in a distributed one?
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually trying to think about that as you were saying it too. I think that Kobalt's done a great job with highlighting it. I mean, as we're doing a lot of the onboarding, it's actually going over these values. And again, going back to the recognition side of things, a lot of time what I've seen work in the past is when you're recognizing someone, you're recognizing them for one of our core values too. So it's, hey, this person's being super tenacious with their ongoing effort to kind of chisel away at whatever this like coding project is for the dev side of things, or hey, this person's being super agile on the marketing side of things by being able to roll out all these landing pages and marketing campaigns in the week that we've been kind of talking about it. So I think those are kind of great ways just to tie it in and really weave it into everything that you do. I think, again, we also have kind of weekly meetings at Kobalt, monthly meetings as well. So being able to recognize employees and stick it to those core values is one way that I've seen work really well in the past. As far as kind of the continuous learning and wanting to always promote your employees, your peers, your coworkers, and help their continuous improvement, how do you kind of foresee that going about, and how do you help promote that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the good things about the world today is it's a lot easier to learn new things online than it has been in the past. We've got, local unicorns like Thinkific that obviously have made a pretty good go at being in that space. And so the opportunities to continue to develop team members outside of a classroom environment have been pretty good. I think of learning across a variety of spectrums, right? So it's, there's the kind of formal like classroom or online or course or reading kind of stuff. But there's also the informal, which in my mind often involves like a lot of specific targeted assignments and work activities where, if I'm trying to, grow Liam into somebody who, is really great at public speaking or at, these other sorts of things, then giving you assignments and activities that specifically align with that sort of work is going to help you just naturally develop those skills, right? And so continuous improvement, like this has been one of the things it is a core value for us as well. And in a distributed environment, it's very easy to kind of fall out of the habit of investing in your people if you're not careful. But it's got to be something that is constantly kind of reinforced. And if we want to improve our team, part of that comes back to us as CEOs as well, right? So us as leaders, part of what we need to do is invest in ourselves. And as we think about investing in ourselves, bringing those lessons and those learnings down to our team. So we've done things like lunch and learns and other activities like that to try to, if somebody's learned something really interesting, bring it to the team, share that knowledge, those sorts of things. But I'd love to hear, I mean, you've only been with us for a couple of months, but you've seen work well in other environments as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think that lunch and learns are a great way of doing it. What I've seen work in the past too is having stuff like learning budgets as well, where it doesn't necessarily just have to be work related. It doesn't have to be, hey, I want to learn how to kind of write JavaScript or like do Ruby or whatever else it is. It's, oh, I want to learn to cook a pizza today. So I'm going to go take a Italian cooking class and figure that out too. And so I think having those learning budgets are one, great for kind of internal growth, avoiding burnout and all that stuff too, but it's also great for retention and making sure your employees are happy. And as your employees kind of stay happy within the organization, generally you like to see the work output kind of grow and grow with that too. As far as actually building up their work careers and helping them achieve like kind of more hoops and bounds on the career front, I like to really promote a lot of 360 feedback. So really having those sit downs once, twice a month, saying, hey, here's the projects we've been working on, here are the goals that we set out for ourselves. You want to work towards XYZ title, here's all the steps that we're going to take to get there. And maybe it's a 3-month plan, maybe it's a 6-month plan, maybe it's a year-long plan to get to where they want to go. But I think really clearly defining those steps, what it looks like and how we're going to achieve that, and helping them mark their efforts along the way is a great way to promote that as well. And it gives them something to kind of work towards and making sure that they're really engaged the entire time. I think that's kind of my big take behind it. But the biggest thing I think is really figuring out how to keep everyone engaged and motivated as they continue on. And so both from a continuous career or non-career growth setting, how do you like to keep people engaged just within the environment and the work company itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just trying to make the work meaningful and fulfilling and fun, right? So, those sort of three things is, people are going to be engaged if they feel like they're contributing, and that their work has purpose, right? And so if they can see that their role has, an impact on the larger mission of the organization, and that the organization itself has an important mission, then people are going to be engaged in helping to achieve that. And then, the fun aspect is something not to lose sight of either, right? Like, nobody wants to go to work every day and, be in a sea of people with dour faces and, kind of grumpy all the time. You want to have fun going to work. You're spending, 8 hours or more of your day with colleagues. And so you want that to be a positive experience for everybody involved. And so making sure that, you're doing the things necessary to enable that, whether that's, taking a load off when people are stressed, or, finding that those moments, as you said, to celebrate and recognize. I think those things, again, really help people be engaged, because, if people feel like they get up in the morning and they're excited to come to work, right, then they're gonna bring their best work, and they're gonna help promote the success of the organization, your customers, and everything else. People get up in the morning and they're like, oh, I got to go through the grind today end, right? Then they're never going to give you their best efforts. So yeah,
for sure. And I think that's something that would be great for everyone attending this chat too, is just kind of pulling them. What is your kind of favorite way to engage your team or engage with your team? Just making sure everyone stays in kind of good mental, good hopes, and making sure that no one's really burning out. So if anyone wants to chime in there, please feel free to jump in the chat. I'll look through in a second. And then kind of carrying on here, like, how are you able to ensure that teams are able to collaborate effectively? I mean, not just kind of stay in those high hopes, but able to collaborate with each other, both within same time zones and different time zones too, with the distributed teams.
Yeah. So I think there's two parts to this. So one of them is tools. Like, tools actually make a big difference here, right? So things like, having Slack for communications, or Zoom, or those sorts of things that make life easier for people to share. I think having common knowledge stores. So we use Confluence, we use a tool like Mural, which is great for like virtual whiteboarding. Those things go a long ways. One of the things that is kind of ironically part of the role of a leader is getting people in different parts of the organization to talk to each other, if that makes sense, because everybody tends to get heads down on their work and focus on their own particular area, and they don't see solutions that exist in other parts of the organization. So, example is, I run a small sales team as part of our team here at Kobalt, and I'm like, hey, Janine, you did this really great thing over here. Go and talk to Scott about it. And Scott, share what you did with Andrea over here, and just fostering that kind of cross team or in between team communication. It's like, hey, Valerie, you're working on this thing, and it would be great if Liam could support you with automation, because he's really talented at that. And so those sorts of opportunities to draw people together to bring their skills to the table just drives some natural collaboration and gets them out of their kind of, one of the big risks in distributed teamwork is you get kind of in your bubble, in your zone, and you get heads down on your work, and you don't actually build those relationships with your team. And so you got to find ways to kind of foster those connections. And then all of a sudden, when you feel like you're part of this large cross-functional organization that's really capable, and you can see how you can bring value to different people, then the magic starts to happen. And so, yeah, so those are two things. Like, one is tools, and the other one is like just finding ways to create those connections that enable, those kind of innovative ideas to occur. I know you're like, I'm a little bit gray-haired myself, thin-haired, you might say. So I'm not always up on all the latest tools, and you're definitely at the forefront of a lot of, tool selection and stuff like that. So, from your perspective, like what are some of the key things that enable collaboration and, from a tool perspective, just are really cool that you've seen that kind of help distributed work?
Yeah, absolutely. So from the software kind of stack side of things, management, stuff like Bamboo, HR, stuff like 7Geese, which is more so a software to help set goals and track goals as they keep going on. So every quarter, if you want to say, okay, we're going to run off a OKR, objective key result system here, we want to say we want to hit X amount of leads per month. We want to run a LTV to CAC ratio of whatever it is. Those are goals that you can start putting in 7Geese, and you can actually track and measure them as you go. So what I've done historically is just kind of input those every single week, and you can start seeing your progress. And I think seeing over 80% of our way there, and we still have 2 weeks left, like those are super rewarding numbers. Stuff like Slack, I think, is probably our biggest one with Kobalt, and has been pretty much the biggest software that I've used historically in all of our companies, whether it be in office or kind of out of office. I think having that kind of offline option too, where, I mean, everyone gets fatigued on Zoom. No one wants to jump in on Zoom calls 7 hours a day, have their content camera going. It gets really like tiring at the same time. So having Zoom, being able to actually message someone and say, hey, we're gonna do this project, let's just coordinate over Zoom. I'll make a Google Docs for us and we can kind of hammer it out together. Like, I think half the time that's so much better than a Zoom call if you're in day out and day out on those calls. In terms of the office space, there's a tool that we used to use called Sakoko. That was a kind of office mapping tool where it was a kind of top-down view of an office. You got to choose your entire layout, how your office looks. You could be on a desert island, you could be in an actual office setting itself, and there's a whole bunch of different rooms, and it integrates with Zoom, it integrates with like video and audio and everything. So you can jump into rooms and people can be talking. You kind of go along throughout the office as you go in your day. And that way it's one little way to connect with people. Maybe everyone's sitting in the lunch lounge, so you can go and join the lunch lounge room and everyone's chatting and just kind of talking about their everyday life. Nice little way to connect, nice little way to disconnect from work and just connect with your team as well at the same time. As you mentioned, I think Miro, Jira, all those kind of visualization tools and organization tools are really helpful. Marketing, dev, I see them used kind of day in, day out, whether it be tracking a whole bunch of like bug tickets for the dev side of things, whether it be tracking go-to-markets for marketing. Those are super helpful. There's a tool called Excalidraw, which I thought was really cool. A lot of our UX teams, when I was doing some consulting way back when, used it, and we were able to all draw at the same screen at the same time. So it's almost like a remote desktop, if you will, but everyone has access to it. So you can mock up a whole bunch of UX drafts on it, and then everyone can go in. You can see everyone's cursors kind of interacting at the same time, which is also great. And then I think just for the recognition, for the engagement side of things, stuff like bucket list, stuff like kudos, where you can reward employees and do all that stuff is always great. And then on the more fun side of things, Jackbox, always a classic for us. We actually have one tomorrow where we're just gonna jump in with the marketing team. We're all gonna quickly go order some Uber Eats for a late lunch and just play some Jackbox, connect with each other, always good. And then I think the most like infamous one that we've done is when we were in office, when I was back at Build Direct, we built an ELO system for ping pong. And so everyone would scan their ID card and you play a game of ping pong, you'd mark who'd won. And then we had a offline app that would track kind of who's sitting where in the leaderboards and whatnot. So we've done the same, myself and a few other colleagues, where we'll just do that, but it's more so for like video games and all that stuff now. Obviously, with being remote and COVID, we have to figure out more digital ways of doing everything. But that was a really cool one that I thought helped. How about you?
I don't think anybody's going to be challenging Marcus on League of Legends on the team, but
no, definitely not.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Excalidraw. Like, that's one of the things I really like about Mural. Like, I picked that tool out because the thing that I missed most about going into the office was getting in front of a whiteboard with a team member and like sketching out designs and solutions to problems. And in many ways, Mural is like better than the in-person thing because like multiple people can collaborate at the same time. You automatically have a digital record. You can go back to it at any time, all this kind of stuff. And so in some ways, like the distributed virtual environment actually provides some benefits. I like the idea that you mentioned around Sukoku of being able to like just have that kind of dynamic kind of virtual environment that people can drop into. And again, it's a kind of opportunistic water cooler conversation events, windows into everybody's soul. I know a lot of people over the Christmas holidays last year, like, you know, we did this in our family. We just had like 4 or 5, you know, FaceTime or Zoom sessions going in with our family all over the place. So even though we couldn't be in person with them, you know, that screen was open all day long. So as people were walking around opening Christmas presents and stuff like that, you felt like you were part of a larger environment. And the idea of, you know, an office environment where this is the water cooler, and when you want to go and chat with people, people are kind of hanging out there, and it's easy to kind of have that opportunistic, just kind of, you know, casual conversation because we are in our pajamas in our homes or whatever it is. You know, it's good to have those opportunities. So
For sure.
I'd love to hear from the attendees if anybody has got any secret tools that they've just entirely fallen in love with through the Zoom, through the pandemic, as it were. Our attendees are pretty quiet so far. So
yeah. Oh, we see one person. Yeah, Cindy said Miro's been her favorite as well. Yeah, great tool. Like for me, Asana and Monday have also been super helpful in organizing everything. But in terms of making sure that we're not onboarding too many technologies and everything, how do you make sure that you're managing your stack and that you're avoiding all that technology fatigue?
I think it is a bit of a risk, right? And so, you know, part of it is when we onboard a technology, like when Mike came on board, who's our director of customer success, you know, he immediately wanted to bring in all these technologies, and he brought in 3 or 4, and I'm like, all right, you know, bring in the 2 or 3 that you think are most critical, and then let's stop and make sure that we're getting good value out of each of these technologies before we go on and implement the next technology, because this is classically a big technology problem. And if you think about a SaaS service, it's like, oh, it's only $5 per user per month, right? Well, yeah, that's fine if it's one tool and I had 5 employees, but now I have 20 employees and I have 20 tools, and all that starts to stack up, right? And so, you know, actually taking the time to make sure that you're getting value out of each of the tools, then people are collaborating on them and that people understand what they're for. I think this is probably the biggest challenge with tools is you end up with a tool space collision, right? So is Slack the way that I communicate for these sorts of things, or is it email, right? Ideally, it's not email because we all hate email at this point. But, you know, what are the things that, you know, every tool has its specifically defined purpose in home? I know we're struggling a little bit with that internally ourselves, where we've got Jira that's being used by our SOC team, and we use it with some customers. We've got Monday that our project management team uses, and Todoist for task items, and like everybody's got their own little thing going on. And you don't want to get too much of that, because then all of a sudden it's like, well, what are we actually doing that's standard within the organization? And those things become really important. The one thing I do think that's really kind of cool at this point is most tools now have exposed APIs, so you can integrate things everywhere. And so if you're like, this automatically pushes through to Slack, or, you know, my HubSpot connects with my, you know, my proposal tool and all these kind of things. So it becomes a little bit more integrated from a workflow perspective. So we don't have to worry about rolling out big ugly ERPs and stuff like this. We can actually use tools that are purpose fit for a particular application. You know, what's something that you've seen in the past in terms of this area? Like, you know, I mean, when you were at Lumen 5, did they have a manageable set of tools? Had they bought too many? You know, were there tools in the closet that were just gathering dust, you know?
Yeah, I think it was kind of going towards what you were saying, where it's like all of our devs are using Jira, and then all of our kind of marketing people, they're on like Monday or Asana or whatever else. And some people are using Notion, some people are over Slack. Like it's hard because you need to find one place to be a repository for everything. So I think it's not necessarily the tools themselves that are the biggest kind of highlight. It's how do you manage them, and how do you put them all into one place so that there's transparency to make sure people aren't doubling up on work. And I think that was the biggest issue that we ran into, especially when I was with Lumen 5 when we first went remote, when COVID first hit. We had our dev team doing a whole bunch of different crazy, awesome stuff. And then we had our marketing team doing other stuff, sales team, so on and so forth. But we all ended up doing the same thing, kind of overlapping a little bit, and no one was weary of it. And so we all ended up using Notion as our big repository. And at Kobalt, we're kind of between Slack and HubSpot, and everything integrates into those two. But the biggest thing that I've found that helps is, I mean, Zapier has really been our saving grace, where everything that we do, all of our forums, all of our kind of outbound marketing, every time a lead comes in, we zap it directly to Slack, so that all of our SDRs, all of our sales members can see it. Everything that we do in terms of that as well, we'll support over to HubSpot. So we have all of our deals kind of going on there. So I think, just to reiterate, the biggest thing for me is just making sure that everything's transparent, everything's in one place. And I think being able to communicate that with the team too, as far as transparency, is huge.
Well, I think there's a cultural core element to this. If you go back to this concept of distributed work, right? So in an office environment, the cultural core is the office itself, right? And so you might have your cafeteria, which is like, you know, the socials, the commons, et cetera, where your foosball table is and all this kind of stuff. But the office, the physical infrastructure, is that kind of common thread that pulls everybody together every single day. And so regardless of the number of tools you have to have some sort of cultural core within your organization in terms of, this is where people gather, right? And so in our organization, that really is Slack. Other tools are used for specific purposes, but Slack is the cultural kind of communication hub for everything, right? And so, you know, I'd be interested in hearing from other attendees in terms of what would you say is your kind of core technology in terms of enabling that inter-team communication and all this kind of stuff. And is it something different than Slack? And so what do you like, what do you dislike? I know we had a little bit of a challenge for a while because we had one team on Teams and one team on Slack. And that, you know, that just, you ended up with separation, and that's not great because you want to avoid silos, especially in a distributed environment. Does anybody have anything else other than Slack that they're using as a core?
Jen said Asana, Pipedrive, Zapier are their go-to. Teams as a hub. Yeah, I definitely agree with that too. I think Asana and Zapier are kind of my big two as well, other than Slack. But I think I live off a little bit of Zapier here and there.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that like we can have all these different tools, and that integration element just, it makes life so much better, right? Like anything that as a manager is like, I can automate that thing that I used to do manually before, is so important if you're trying to scale a startup. So
for sure, I think it helps save so much time too, and really manage my time day in, day out as well, having kind of those automations, those integrations, and making sure everything kind of lives in one spot. I mean, maybe push that question to you. I mean, how are you making sure that you're managing your time positively, and as well as kind of helping the team manage their time correctly as well?
Yeah. So again, I think clear goal setting is really important with the team, making sure that everybody understands their role within the organization. And then, you know, I've learned a lot of best practices, you know, in the last kind of 12 months as a CEO. You know, I've been doing it longer than that, but so, you know, a few things are just getting back to basics, right? So just regular goal setting across different time periods, right? So I have like a weekly chunk of my calendar first thing on Monday morning where I go through and say, all right, what are my objectives for the day, the week, the month, making sure that I'm just kind of reinforcing that in my own mind. Setting aside flow time, which I think is probably another thing that we should start getting into a little bit. So, you know, carving off time in my calendar for non-interrupted work is really, really critical. In the absence of that, it's really hard to get meaningful work done in a week. And so, so those two things for me have been really, really effective at helping me move the ball forward every week. But you know, I'd be curious to see your take on that as well. And also, like you mentioned before, like headphones on, you know, those quiet days that in an ideal world you're not in the office. So what are you doing to achieve flow in your days?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to make a mental note that there's two more messages coming in on the chat there. So I'll get to those in 1 second. I think the biggest thing for me for time management and flow, the biggest thing that I've seen really help the team really concentrate and make sure that we're not spreading ourselves too thin is we do a kind of marketing top 3 every Monday. So that's first thing Monday morning. Everyone just kind of goes into Asana or Monday, posts their top 3 things that they're going to be working on and all their little subtasks within that. And that way they know that they have, hey, this is our set thing that we're going to be working on this week. This is what we know we need to achieve. They're not going to take on 8,000 things at once and kind of maybe not get anything done on time. It's really just, hey, we're going to do these 3 big things. And if we have time outside of that, we'll start working on those. And obviously there's going to be small, like miscellaneous tasks. I mean, in terms of like running ads and doing all that stuff, we have to check in on that kind of day in, day out, do the reporting and everything. But my 3 big tasks this week really are going to be like onboarding some HubSpot stuff, making sure that we're launching kind of new ads and onboarding new ad platforms or whatever else it may be. And then the other thing too is I always kind of front load my days or my weeks with meetings. So Monday and Tuesday are always my meetings days, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I generally try and keep it to like 2-3 meetings and kind of limit it to like 2 hours of meetings for those days if I possibly can. I mean, obviously not always doable, but if I can do that, then it also caves out a lot of time for myself to help get everything sorted, get all my mind together. And as you said, get those kind of flow sessions of, hey, how do I need to do this? What am I going to do here? As well as making sure the team's set to do their stuff. And then after that's all done, I can go and just hammer out all my work for the rest of the week. But jumping back to the questions about all the softwares, Aaron was saying that they use Slack, which is working great, do sometimes run into issues with cross time zone collaboration. So they're between Europe and North America. And sometimes Slack notifications pile up overnight. It's hard to keep track or catch up. Definitely understand that. I've kind of worked with a lot of teams out in India and Europe as well, and definitely understand that. I think we were on email before, and it was even worse, where you'd kind of come in and have 50 emails that you'd have to address and spend an entire day knocking those out. And it was literally just a game of volleyball, hitting those back and forth, because then they would wake up with the, I think it was 12.5 hours difference. So when we would go to sleep, they would wake up, they would have 50 emails to answer, and then it was just kind of this nonstop back and forth. So I found that Slack's been a little bit nicer to address that, but there's definitely—
the nice thing about Slack is it's like auto-threaded, right? So you can get into a specific topic in a specific channel, and you can focus on that topic in that channel. But and we all suffer from email overload. I want to tell a couple of stories here, because for those of you who registered early and might have seen my post on Matt Mullenweg's kind of 5 stages to nirvana in distributed work. There are ways to get to better productivity in distributed work, and one of those is fully embracing the async, right? So recognizing that you don't need to be in meetings all day, and you can carve out flow time and stuff like this. And I have a story from back when I was running the sales engineering team at Sophos, where literally we would work on problems around the world overnight by leveraging people in different time zones. So somebody in Australia would ask a question about a problem that they were having with a customer, and it would start in Australia, would spin over to Europe, would come to North America, and by the time it got back to Australia the next day, like 12 people across 15 different time zones in 6 different countries had worked on the problem and like fully baked a solution for the original requester, which is not something that can happen in a day. And so, but there's a lot of challenges to that distributed environment as well. Like, one of my challenges was, because I was running a global team, 120 people in 17 countries, my email box would just constantly fill up throughout the day, right? They would never ever stop. And like, people would call me all times a day, and literally I just, back in the days of BlackBerry, and I'd turn off my phone at night, I'd turn it on in the morning, it'd be 100 new email messages, right? One of the nice things about switching over to Telus for me when I left Sophos and joined Telus was, the emails actually kind of stop after a certain hour a day, right? It's like, oh, this is nice, right? Like the team has quieted down and gone back to bed. Now that we're back in a global environment, it's a little bit more distributed, but our team is more centered in the Western time zone, so it tends to quiet off a little bit at night, which is nice because we all need downtime, right? So, yeah. Anyway.
For sure. Yeah, and then jumping to one more question too from Cindy. She was saying, not sure if she missed it, but what are our favorite integrations for Zapier and Asana? I mean, fielding it for myself, I think Asana for me, I use it more as a repository for everything. So a lot of stuff all kind of bleeds into that eventually. One of the biggest kind of call outs that's top of mind for me is I do a lot of my reporting offline on Google Sheets and everything. And the nice thing is you can kind of just make a quick little note on Google Sheets and send that straight to Asana. So if I'm ever looking at any reporting or any metrics where I'm saying, oh, hey, ads did super well this week, or, oh, we need to actually pick up some of our ads, I can quickly make a little note, send that straight to Asana so that I know that as I'm reporting, I can continue on and continue finishing my reporting while also having that note be top of mind there. And then for Zapier, for me, we have so many of them. But I think the biggest helpful one for me is for all of our outbound marketing efforts. So all the ads that we do inbound as well, actually, for like SEO and whatnot. Anytime a lead comes in, we're automatically passing those through to HubSpot. We're sending a Slack notification to all of our SDRs so they can pick up on those leads and help start nurturing them. There's another one too, if you use tools like Apollo or any data enrichment platforms, you can actually pass, anytime a lead comes in, and pass it through a data enrichment platform and then pass that to HubSpot. So what that looks like is a lead will come in, you have their email, it'll pass through Apollo, it'll pick up all of their names, who they work for, the company size, kind of so on and so forth. And that entire packet of data will then get passed on to HubSpot from just an email. So what that does is it helps you limit a lot of your lead gen forms. You don't necessarily need to have 8 different fields on a lead gen form. You can just ask for their email or their name and collect the rest of that through the Zap integration. So it makes it a lot less frictionful as you go there. And generally, you'll see actually higher conversion rates on a lot of them outbound marketing efforts from that too. Michael, I'm not sure if there's anything from your side.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the whole, just generally speaking, Zap to Slack channel integration, where, you know, we can take a feed in from, as you said, like leads. If we've got inbound form fills and stuff like that, automatically shows up. And like, I don't need to be paying attention to that, but I see something show up and it's like, hey, a new lead came in, and I don't have to go digging for that stuff. It's just surfaced. The one that you and another team member made about every time we close a sales deal, it does this little ringing the bell thing. It's just like celebrating those little pieces of success along the way. And having that automatically piped into a channel is a really good way for people to keep a pulse on activities that are going across the business. Because one of the challenges in a distributed environment, as you all know, is like people are busy, just working away on their thing, and they're not necessarily talking about it all the time in public. But if you can find a way to use Zaps and Slacks and stuff like that to kind of automatically surface the activities that are going on in your organization, then you start to get a feel for the buzz and the hum and everything else that's going on in the company, which helps maintain that energy and that momentum, which I think is really cool. So I really like some of the Zaps that you've built around that kind of stuff for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to open up to the chat here too. Is there any other questions that you have, whether it be software integration wise or anything distributed or remote work? Love to field any of those that you may have.
Well, we're waiting for that. I'll give you a couple more of my flow hacks. So you've got your headphones and that kind of stuff. I'm a big fan of 2 things. So one of them is an app called Brain FM, which is specifically designed to help you seek different types of flow state depending on the type of work that you want to do. So if it's light work or deep work, they've got kind of specific kind of music patterns and stuff like that that are designed to kind of get your brain waves into the right beta, theta, delta, alpha states kind of thing. And similarly, if you don't want to get that specific, just lo-fi music in general is one of those things that's like when you want to just kind of sit down, get focused on a keyboard, tune out the distractions and stuff like that. It's a really useful tool. Apparently, it's really popular with all the youngs, less so with people my age. But
yeah, I do a lot of podcast listening myself.
Yeah.
In terms of actually learning and kind of continuing, I know we kind of talked about doing lunch and learns and stuff like that, but obviously with remote work, you can't go over to someone and say, oh, hey, look what I just learned and do all that stuff. How do you continue to learn and build on that foundation while you're remote?
Yeah. I've been doing a fair number of online courses and kind of more workshop-y style courses, which has been really valuable. I did one on brain optimization in the fall that was just fantastic. It was kind of a moderated program that involved online learning and like a bit of a coach through the process. I'm a big fan of, again, like these platforms like Thinkific and stuff like that take all the content that you have and then make it easy for you to construct content for your staff, right? And so one of our sales leads, Keith, has been building all this onboarding stuff for all of our new hires, which is great because we can turn it out to partners and all sorts of other areas. And so taking that knowledge base that exists inside the organization. I mean, one of the great things about Zoom is it's so easy to just hit that record button, and then you have something that is now an asset that can be used by other people in the organization at a future date if they weren't able to attend the meeting and stuff like that. And so getting in the habit of, capturing stuff so that it's reusable and becomes part of the kind of knowledge base asset of the organization, I think is really valuable. So, and then, personally, I tend to be a little bit old school. I read a lot of books, right? And I don't read on Kindle because if I were to read on Kindle, my book budget would probably be about $4,000 a year, and that's an expensive habit. But I just use my library app and I reserve books, and I probably read, somewhere between 50 and 100 books in a given year. And that's a constant source of learning for myself, and podcasts and stuff like that as well. So
wow, yeah, I wish I can get to that many books a year. I feel like I try and get through one a month and call it good enough. But
yeah.
I'm a big podcast guy, so I'll listen to a lot of like audiobooks and a lot of that stuff. I think something that I found really helpful is as I go along with everyday work, anything that I don't know top of hand that someone asks me, or if I run into an issue and I'm trying to set something up or do a certain task and I don't know, I just kind of jot it down, and I have a list of probably 150 different things of, oh, I don't know how to do X, Y, Z, and here's the function for it. And then it's not so much how do I learn it, but it's how do I figure out these kind of things, where it's going off that list and then going on YouTube, going on Dr. Google, as I would say, consult Dr. Google, and trying to figure out a lot of those things. And I think Jaden had a question in the chat here saying, on the same note, what strategies do you use or recommend to manage distributed teams across different time zones?
Yeah, that's a good question. The different time zone issue is a particular one. I mean, I don't think it's really that dissimilar from managing people in local time zones, because at the end of the day, it depends a lot on the role, but for most people, it's, they have a set of objectives that they need to conduct. And, if let's use North America as an example, you typically want to cluster the things that are interactive during a set of times that work for most people, right? So that's typically like your 10 to 1 o'clock kind of time zone for North American audiences. And then you try to set the rest of the day available for more async work, right? So this is your flow time and stuff like that. And I struggle with this myself. Like, I've got a salesperson out of Ontario that's doing a lot of work. I would prefer to have my async flow work early in the morning, because that's my natural kind of high mental state time. And I like to do meetings in the afternoons, because that's less demanding on me mentally in some ways. But because I have somebody I'm supporting out east, I have to set aside more time in my day for meetings with him and customers and stuff like that. So those are challenges that I think we're all faced with. But depending on the time zones that you're working with, setting aside some core time that works for everybody for those core real-time interactions, and carving out the rest of the time for that async work, and then just managing, whether it's a tool like 70s or whatever, to those objectives, I think is really important. So good question, Jaden.
Yeah, for sure. And I think kind of adding on that too, what I've found super helpful is making sure that we really set out a clear and concise roadmap. So whether it be the go-to-market on the marketing side of things, or if we're doing any road mapping kind of on the product management side of things, making sure that we're very clear and concise about what needs to be done and what are all those steps that need to be taken. That also leads the team to be able to work async as well. And so once that starts happening, you eventually find this flow. And as you start connecting with all your teammates, everyone just gets kind of delegated tasks and are able to come up with those autonomously. And then everyone just kind of does their part, will come together eventually, depending on the time
once
zone.
everybody understands the stack of work that's in front of them, and they can just pick the next thing up off the stack, and they don't have to go and talk to somebody to do that, then that makes it a lot easier, right? So that clarity is really, really important.
For sure. Yeah. In terms of softwares for that, I mean, Asana's great. Jira, I think, has been probably the most helpful, and just with how you can kind of draft out everything, and you have the Trello boards and whatnot within the app itself. Confluence on the other side of Jira too, the other kind of part of their company, making sure you can actually diagram all that stuff and have those shared pages that everyone can edit have been super helpful as well.
Yeah, for sure. There's there's definitely an evolution from the kind of Google Docs where I'm just trying to dump stuff into a document. And it's great for like collaboration on a file, but it's not so great for like, I need a page where everybody can just dump in content, right? Which is something that's better for something like Confluence. But Notion as well is one of those tools that seems to be getting a lot of steam. But it's picking something, right? It's picking something that makes it easy for people to collaborate. And one of the great things about all this kind of distributed work is, and the tools arrived at just the right time. It's like we have this ability to just, have a shared file, it's posted to a Slack channel or whatever. Everybody gets in there, they post their comments, and you can iterate so quickly as a team without having to like, email a document back and forth 33 times and have revision control issues and all these sorts of problems, right? So it's really nice. It's good that the pandemic occurred when it did, so that we have the tool set to enable us to actually effectively work remote. Imagine even if we were doing this 10 or 15 years ago, we'd be in way worse shape than we are today.
Yeah, everything would be email. Yeah, I can't imagine.